Hey everybody, how's it going? This is going to be a video on the Primarch novel, and it's going to be a long video. But before I do that, a quick update. I haven't done anything painting related or hobby related in a while. I've been busy with some stuff, getting ready for something that happened, which was a cornea transplant in my right eye, which I knew was happening, obviously. It's not a spur of the moment thing, it's something you plan out. So that happened, it all went well, but there's a lot of follow-up and healing with that, and obviously my right eye, which was the eye I was done in, if I didn't say that, is very scratchy and irritated and annoying, and I don't want to try and paint in detail parts on a model that isn't that big to begin with. I mean, the models aren't that big, and having to do it with like one eye closed because it's just too sensitive to light and too blurry anyway, and dealing with that and trying to paint in detail and do a decent job with my mediocre skills, I figured I'd hold off on that a little bit. So, but that will be coming up. I will be doing the Owl Cypher, finishing them. I already have an idea for the next Let's Make a Model series and all that, so just tough it out a bit, and that will return. And I'm also back to doing some videos, so I'll try and get some videos off of other stuff as well. Alrighty, so this is going to be a long one. The Primarchs. This is a novel, well, it's a collection of 4 short stories or novellas or whatever on 4 different legions, with the intention of giving you insight into the Primarchs. At least that's my thought based on the name of the novel, the Primarchs. My thought process, and if you look at the back of the novel, it's about the Primarchs. I'll let you pause that if you want to read that. But basically, it's to give you some insight into the Primarchs. Now, this novel, I was looking forward to because I'm a big fan of the Horus Heresy series, and the Primarchs are very cool and kind of these beings you don't know much about, even though they do get a decent amount of play in the Horus Heresy novels. They're still kind of, cast in mystery and shadow. That being said, out of the 20-something or 20, I think it's up to 20 now. It should say in the book here. We're up to book 20 is the Primarchs. Of the 20 books, I'd say this one, looking at all of them and weighing them in my mind, this one is probably the weakest for me, and sitting towards the bottom in terms of if I had to rank the books. And that being said, I still enjoyed reading it, but it's definitely the weakest for me. And I'm gonna talk a little bit overall. I'm not gonna go into each novel or each story in this novel in depth, but I will give you a little bit of background information on it, and then I'll go into my thoughts on how they could have made this better. But firstly, this is a collection of 4 stories. The first story is an Emperor's Children story, the second story is an Iron Hand story, the third story is a Dark Angel story, and the fourth one is an Alpha Legion story. They don't link up to each other at all. You can read them in any order you want, and I personally read the Dark Angels last because they're my favorite Legion, and I saved them for last. The one thing I like about the Horus Heresy series in terms of the novels is that you don't have to read all other 19 books before you read this one. With the exception of like the 2 Dark Angel books and a couple of the Horus, the first like 3 books or so of the Horus Heresy series, you don't have to read them in order. Now, if there's a part 1 or 2, then yeah, you have to read those obviously in order. But you can read, for example, The Son of Angels, and then you can read Prospero Burns, and then you can read Thousand Sons. You don't have to read Thousand Sons before Prospero Burns if you don't want to. You can read Fulgrim and then read The First Heretic. And then you can read the Primarchs and then read Horus Rising. You don't have to do them in any particular order. They do follow a timeline, though, so I will tell you that. But you don't have to read them in order, and I like that because if you're just getting into the series, 20 books in so far that the series is, it might be a little bit of like, oh my god, I gotta read 20 books before I can be up to date. It makes them a bit of a challenge. But you don't have to, you can just read the ones you want. With that being said, the Emperor's Children story, in my mind, was the weakest story in this book. It does good character development for a character we know already called Lucius. He was in the Horus Heresy novel series before, and he's the special character in the Chaos Space Marine Codex, Lucius the Eternal, same guy. But as far as dealing with the Primarch and developing the Primarch, I felt it fell short. I felt it kind of undid some really cool things that they did in the novel Fulgrim. The strongest story would have to be the Alpha Legion story. And I'm sure some of you expect me to say the Dark Angel story. Now, as big of a Dark Angel fan as I am, the Alpha Legion story was, I think, the best in this book. And I've always been a fan personally of the Alpha Legion and the way they do things, and just having more written about them and seeing them be Alpha Legion and do their thing is cool. And I have to say, they definitely did a very good job with that story. I was definitely surprised with it a bit, not because I was expecting it to be bad, but how they did it and what they did with it, I enjoyed and I was not expecting. So, a very good story in this book. The other two, the Iron Hands and the Dark Angel story, they were I would say solid. They're definitely a solid average story. Um, the Dark Angel story had a point in it that I feel, just because I'm a Dark Angel fan, I was like, oh man, it makes them kind of look lame, but they're not. They were just dealing with a new threat they never saw before. And it also had a huge knowledge bomb dropped at the end of that story. That if you're a Dark Angels fan or know anything about the Dark Angels storyline from pre-heresy and post-heresy, it's definitely a big knowledge bomb that I was not expecting them to drop, because with the Dark Angels and their stories, they never really give you anything tangible to go on. And this is like kind of the first time they did it, and it was kind of a big knowledge drop, so that was kind of cool. I'd say the biggest knowledge drop of the four stories. The Iron Hand story was just a good, solid story. You get to see the Iron Hands be Iron Hands. You get to see them with the whole flesh is weak mantra and bionic enhancements and all that. And that was cool. But overall, though, I'd say it's a weak book. We had one weak story, one strong story, and two average stories. So if you're going to take that as like a test score, it would be a pretty good score. Or a pretty decent score. But still, overall, for me personally, and this comes down to personal preference, it was just kind of weak. I think part of that is the Primarchs are these godlike beings, these demigods, sons of the Emperor, literally sons of the Emperor, who's viewed as a god, obviously now in the 40k fluff. But he's a godlike being. These are demigod-like beings, far above the capabilities of a Space Marine. And therefore, it's probably hard to write about them without being cheesy over the top, or without being underwhelming. So, it must be hard to get in that central zone, where the sweet spot, if you will. And as far as Space Marines go, the authors that write these novels that are pretty much Space Marine centric do a fantastic job of giving you the Space Marines viewpoint and mindset. I think that's got a very good formula for success down for it. And I think the Primarchs just don't, because part of them is that they're these mythical demigod-like beings that don't really exist as a prominent force in the 41st millennium. It's like they had their heyday and then they vanished. So, with that, it might be, I would imagine, for writers, I'm not a writer, but I imagine for writers it's probably difficult to capture them without being over the top and silly. Also, I imagine it's difficult to capture the Primarchs in a short story section like this. I mean, there's 4 stories in this book. This book is how many pages long to the very end story? It's 440 pages. Now, that's like, 110 pages per story if you're going to break it down by 4. Sounds like it's a decent chunk sounding, but for developing, I would say, or getting deep into the mindset and fleshing out the Primarchs, I imagine it's kind of short. So, with that being said, I think just the nature of doing it in a novella style like this probably hampers their ability to really flesh them out and go too crazy in depth. Alright, with that being said, I would do things a little bit differently with this novel. If they could do it all again, and go back in time, I would think there's a different methodology they should have taken. If they want to keep it 4 stories, that's fine. Let's just look at the core. Let's say the book is, let's say in design it's going to be, okay, 4 different legions, 4 short stories about the Primarchs of those legions. Okay. Look at the legions they picked, though. The Emperor's Children Legion had a novel, Fulgrim, and it's been kind of a force in other novels as well. And the Dark Angels had 2 novels devoted to them. They're definitely going to have a third. I imagine the Emperor's Children would have a second novel devoted to them, but the Dark Angels are definitely probably going to have a third novel devoted to them. If you know anything about the Dark Angels in the Fall and all that jazz, you know what kind of happens. It happens during the end of the Horus Heresy, and at the very least, towards the end of this novel, the Horus Heresy series, you'll probably see another Dark Angels novel, if not before that. So those two legions are most likely going to get more play in novels, directly their own. They could have taken the stories they were trying to develop here and implemented them in those novels, if you want to think about it that way, and probably done a very good job with it, flesh it out more, and tie it into the other plots of the novels to be. The Iron Hands and the Alpha Legion, I would say, are good picks. The Alpha Legion had a novel already, and was part of a couple other short stories or novels, but they're such a heavily secreted legion, and the way they do things is like the veils of secrecy that you don't get too much out of them. So able to dig into them more and directly through their Primarchs, I would say, is a good tactic, and I think it gives more information for Alpha Legion fans out there, which is pretty cool. The Iron Hands Legion, we have nothing about them directly. Ferrus Manus was in Fulgrim, and that was it, and that's where he died. And in the timeline of the Horus Heresy, like I said, all 20 books push towards a timeline. So the current timeline of the Horus Heresy is some point after the Isstvan 5 drop site massacre, which means that's some point after Ferrus Manus dies. So they're going to do an Iron Hands novel of the Horus Heresy. It'll be pretty cool, actually, because we'd see a fractured, nearly destroyed, obliterated Iron Hands Legion, and seeing them kind of, I don't know, maybe come together like the Raven Guard did in their novel and rebuild, but come together Primarch-less and see who takes over, or what they do and who takes over to lead the Legion, or maybe if they're gonna get the Council and get their Iron Hand Council type stuff going on. I don't know. It would be cool to see them kind of salvage the Legion as a novel, but that wouldn't give us anything for the Primarch. So they probably wouldn't jump so far back in the timeline to give us information on the Primarchs. So doing it in a novella style makes sense, short story style, whatever. So those two legions should stay, and as much as I'm a fan of the Dark Angels, they should have been cut out of here, and the Emperor's Children should have been cut out of here. So what does it leave us with? It leaves us with 2 spots. So if you're going to fill it with a traitor legion and a loyal legion, we have some choices here. For loyal legions, there's 2 choices. They could go salamanders. Their Primarch is still alive. Maybe the story of how he links up with his legion, or something about Vulcan a bit, could be done. But I think a stronger choice, personally, for the Loyalist Legion would be the White Scars, because they have absolutely nothing. They don't even have a short story devoted to themselves, really, if I remember correctly. They're kind of mentioned here and there in other stories. So, the White Scars on the Khan, perfect choice to be in this book, because in my mind, this book is to give us insight into Primarchs, and in my personal opinion, should be insight into the Primarchs we know very little about, and the legions we haven't heard much from, and the White Scars we heard next to nothing from. So this would have been a cool time to give us character development for the White Scars and their Primarch. As far as traitor legions go, you could do Night Lords. They haven't had anything directly for them substantially in a while, but I think a better choice would be the Iron Warriors Legion with Perturbo, because they have had pretty much next to nothing as well. They have a similar predicament as the White Scars, so a good time to see their Legion character development for legionaries in the Legion as well as their Primarch. I think if they did that, this book would have been more appealing to the audience, I would think, or readers. Now, I think it's still pretty appealing. I obviously picked it up and I read it, even though I knew what legions were going to be in it once I saw more about it. But I think if it had the White Scars and the Iron Warriors in there in place of the Dark Angels and the Emperor's Children, I think this book would have been innately stronger if that was the case, or had the capability to be a much stronger book and more appealing to readers, because 2 legions we know next to nothing about getting some play finally. Anyways, this has gone on long enough, I'm sure, for a lot of you. Thanks for sticking with me on this long video ramble a bit. And to sum it up, for me, the weakest book, but it's not a waste of money. I think if you pick it up, you will be entertained. There's a very strong story of the Alpha Legion in there, and the Iron Hand and Dark Angel stories are solid. In my mind, the Emperor's Children story is a bit weak, but you may think differently, and that's fine. Anyways, that's it. So until next time, take it easy.